and welcome to the podcast Shedding Candlelight on Cryptids, Hauntings, Mythology, and more. If it is weird, we are talking about it. This is your host, Lee Donna, and I am in the room with my little grandpuppy Stella. So if she makes an appearance or you hear somebody bumping all over the microphone, that is probably her. But today I am primed to ruin all of your fun when it comes to the cryptid known as the Jersey Devil. Not because there is not a blood curdling creature running wild in the American Northeast, but because politicians have been ruining lives since 1735. Well, long before that, but who's counting? Like every good urban legend and myth, the origin story for the Jersey Devil varies based on who told it to you and who told it to them. In just about every version, though, there is a devil, a witch, and a curse. This story begins in a land of sand where an ocean of pine trees stretches out across the seemingly barren ecosystem. Despite its proximity to the highly populated areas of Philadelphia and New York City, the land known as the New Jersey Pine Barrens remains to this day largely undeveloped, which is a pretty big deal considering the Pine Barrens occupy nearly 25% of New Jersey's total land mass. The locals in the area refer to the acidic, nutrient poor, fine sand soil in the Pine Barrens as sugar sand because in 1938, Lena Blackburn, a third base coach for the Philadelphia Athletics, launched a brand of special mud called Lena Blackburn Baseball Rubbing Mud. This special mud utilized the fine grained sand from the Pine Barrens and was used just how the name says to rub baseballs. When baseballs are made, they come out shiny and slick, something baseball pitchers do not like. Lena knew this and also knew that other methods used to rub down the balls so that the pitchers could grip them better usually left the baseballs scuffed up and or discolored. But if you have ever used fine grained sandpaper, you know that the fine stuff does a fine job of not tearing things up. So Lena invented or harvested a special blend of pine barren mud that is said to be akin to thick chocolate pudding. By the 1950s, every Major League Baseball team was using this mud, and this practice of rubbing down the balls still happens today by the umpires before every Major League game. It seems to me that the companies making the balls would just pre-scuff them so that everything is uniform, but I don't know anything about sports, so maybe baseball just likes being inefficient, as does the government. Speaking of which, in 1978, Congress organized the first national reserve in the United States, designating 1.1 million acres of the Pine Barrens as the Pine Lands National Reserve. The intent being to preserve the ecology of the Pine Barrens. 10 years later, the United Nations got involved, designating the reserve as an international biosphere reserve, which is an intergovernmental scientific endeavor aimed at improving the relationship between humans and their environment. I am not going to get into the weeds on this, but if you want to know where swamp things are made, it could be that they are products of scientific studies conducted in secluded, government controlled areas. During the vast majority of the 1700s, the United States did not exist. The American colonies were under British authority. The Revolutionary War that gave the colonies their freedom from the British Crown did not officially kick off until 1775 and not ending until the fall of 1783. However, long before this, European settlers were invading the area we now know as the United States. One such family was the Leeds family, Leeds. They were of the prominent Quaker religion and had a strong allegiance to the British crown. Their family crest was adorned by a legendary dragon like creature known as the wyvern. It had leathery, bat like wings and stood upright on two clawed feet. Daniel Leeds was born in England in 1652. When he was 25 years old, he traveled with his father and family to the British American colonies, settling in Shrewsbury, New Jersey in 1677. Daniel and his family were very prominent, and in his work as a surveyor for the British Crown, Daniel ended up surveying land in the Pine Barrens known as Egg Harbor. He was later given this land by the British Crown, and it is passed down through generations of his family and became known as Leeds Point. If you are familiar with the story of the Jersey Devil, you are probably familiar with Leeds Point because it is here that a myth was born. In 1735, out in the dense forests of the Pine Barrens, a woman known as Mother Leeds was about to give birth to her 13th child. This woman was known to dabble in the dark arts, but even this witch knew better than to have any association with the unluckiness of the number 13. So during a long and agonizing labor, she cursed the unborn child, proclaiming that this one would not just belong to the devil. No, she shouted to all who would listen, let this one be the devil. Hours later, this legendary child ripped itself free of its human host, spreading its leathery bat like wings as it threw back its horse like head and pierced the night with a high pitched, blood curdling screech. Then it stomped its two clawed feet against the planks of the Leeds family home and ran for the chimney. Mother Leeds watched in awe as the monster she birthed disappeared, its forked tail the last she ever saw of it that night. Local clergymen tried to exorcise the creature from the Pine Barrens, but the Leeds devil would not be exiled from the home it was born to. The God fearing Quakers implored Mother Leeds to do something about the beast who mutilated their livestock. But there, right in the historical records, it is written that Mother Leeds once had to be chastised by the Quakers for brewing and selling strong drink. Yes, she is a witch, and as such, she refused to interfere with the actions of her monstrous child. In fact, for her child to have been born a monster, its father had to be no other than Lucifer himself. If you know anything about how women were treated in the old days, this is straight from the witch trial playbook. If a smart woman went out into the forest and mixed some herbs to make a tincture, well, then she must be a witch. And as such, she must love the devil, but only if that smart woman had something a man wanted, because otherwise she was a beloved healer or a midwife, someone important to her society. In 1736, Japheth Leeds named 12 children in his will. He was married to a woman named Deborah. Deborah is the woman who has that written record of chastisement attached to her name, and most historians agree that she is the Mother Leeds from the legend of the Jersey Devil, a moniker her monstrous child was given in the 1900s, once the origin of the Leeds Devil, sometimes called the Devil of the Leeds, was well forgotten with the passing of time. We are talking more than 150 years after the fact when the Devil of Leeds became known as the Jersey Devil. But Why was this rumor of a devilish 13th child even started to begin with? Japheth Leeds was born in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey on October 24th, 1682. His father was Daniel Leeds, the English surveyor who came to the Americas with his father in 1677. And it is with Daniel that the story actually begins. When Daniel first came to the colonial pre revolution area of New Jersey, he was of the Quaker faith and highly regarded in that community. The old saying that birds of a feather flock together, proving true when we look at how people immigrate to different parts of the globe. Daniel's family settled where others of their kind were settling, their kind being English and Quaker. However, 10 years later, in 1687, Daniel Leeds was ostracized by the Quaker community, kicked out, ignored, shunned. It was so bad that had he been a woman, he would have been burned at the stake because Daniel Leeds had the audacity to put out an almanac, giving people information about things like when to plant crops based on the heavens. That's right. He included astrological symbols in his almanacs, talking about what can be observed in the sky above. And well, that was just plain blasphemy. The Quakers lost their minds. They said that what Daniel was printing in his almanacs was pagan, which anything pre Christianity is pagan, and every culture in the world predating Christianity used the heavens as a guide. So the Quakers were technically not wrong. I guess that's why they felt so righteous when they banned the almanacs from their community, destroying them, burning them, and ordering everyone to stay away from Daniel Leeds. Well, this was heartbreaking for Daniel. He was so devastated that he stopped printing his almanacs. I'm kidding. Daniel doubled down. He not only continued to print his almanacs, but he expanded their topics, now deciding to explore things like demonology. He also explored cultism within Christianity, natural magic, angels, and Christian mysticism. All of these topics went over great with the Quakers. In fact, after trying to further censor these almanacs that dared talk about devilish things such as the winter solstice, the heads of the Quaker religion in that area met in Philadelphia and declared that Daniel's almanacs were not only blasphemous, but that the man himself was a heretic. Daniel responded by converting to Anglicanism or Episcopalian, after which he began to publish anti Quaker propaganda. In these tracts, Daniel broke apart the Quaker theology and went so far as to tell everyone who read his almanac that the Quakers were anti monarchist. He said these Quakers did not want to be ruled by England. No truer fighting words had ever been spoken because Daniel Leeds was correct. The people in the colonies were already rebelling against British rule. They wanted England out of their business. But what else could Daniel do but call them out when he himself was so loyal to the English crown? Furthermore, Daniel worked as an advisor for the British appointed Royal Governor of New Jersey, Lord Cornbury, a man utterly despised by the Quakers. They did not care if Daniel Leeds had the governor on his side. To the Quakers, Daniel was nothing more than a traitor to his faith and a traitor to the colonies. They told their congregations that Daniel Leeds was evil. And in 1700, they released a little publication of their own. It was titled Satan's Harbinger Encountered. This was in direct retaliation against Daniel Leeds, and inside the pages, the Quakers told the world that evil Daniel Leeds worked for the devil. In 1716, Daniel's son Titan inherited the family almanac business. His father, Daniel, died 4 years later in 1720. But Titan did not stop printing, nor did he cower away from his father's original vision for the almanac. Daniel Leeds may have earned himself a reputation as a British suck-up occultist, but Titan tripled down, continuing to print the blasphemous astrological content. And in 1728, to make sure no one forgot that his family was part of the English aristocracy, Titan began printing the almanac with the Leeds family crest contained on it, a crest depicting the legendary bat-winged, dragon-headed creature known as the Wyvern. The addition of the crest did not do the Leeds family any favors. It only further ostracized them from the Quaker community they were living among and gave them a poor reputation in the Pine Barrens, with the family increasingly being associated with devils and monsters. During this time of increasing animosity, there was another almanac being published in the area. And funny enough, it was produced by a pro colony, anti monarchist political philosopher named Benjamin Franklin. We do not have time to go into the full history of Ben Franklin, but he is one of the founding fathers of the United States. So it is no surprise that he had an answering almanac to stand in opposition of the faithfully British Leeds family. If you were in the United States, you have probably heard of Poor Richard's Almanac. Ben Franklin published this almanac under a pseudonym for a while, and he got rich off of it. And I dare say a large part of that was due to the growing animosity between the Leeds family and like 95% of everyone else, in addition to the growing divide between the colonies and the crown. Benjamin Franklin did not pull any punches when it came to his opinion about the Leeds family, and he was really great about making things funny so people would easily repeat Ben's ideology. When we can laugh something off, we don't take the time to really sift through the meaning because we are given leave not to ponder the larger implications. In 1733, Poor Richard's Almanac used the astrology the Leeds family almanac was so fond of to predict the death of Titan Leeds. After the date passed, Titan, still alive and well, published a rebuke of Benjamin Franklin, calling him a fool and a liar. Ben Franklin, making sure to keep this drama going because it was good for almanac sales, published his response to Titan's rebuke, telling everyone who picked up his almanac that Titan Leeds had, in fact, died as predicted, and that it was now the resurrected ghost of Titan Leeds writing the wyvern crested pagan almanac. The two men continued to banter via their almanacs, and when Titan Leeds actually died in 1738, Benjamin Franklin still referred to the man as a ghost. Because of their wealth, connections, and basically using the family almanac as social media or a place to propagandize and air their religious and political opinions without cowardice, the Leeds family was well known. The monikers attached to them were those depicting the family as evil, in league with Satan, born of and breeding monsters. Listen, if you are not watching the video version, my grand puppy Stella is making an appearance. She's climbing all over me currently, so that is why I'm laughing a little bit. It could be that this reputation or this image was what bothered Japheth and Deborah, making it so that Japheth converted back to being Quaker. Japheth might have been trying to realign the family with their neighbors in the Pine Barrens and with the political anti British climate that was heating all around them. His wife, Deborah, was a Quaker, and the Quakers kept pretty good records, which is why we know that Deborah was chastised by the Quakers for brewing strong drink. Her last child, Hannah, was born in 1726. However, it is theorized that she had another child, one either stillborn or born with deformities of some sort. This child may or may not have lived. It was not uncommon in those days for deformed children to be neglected, unnamed, or even left to die. The children were considered cursed by God, unclean, all of the things that seems unconscionable to believe. Furthermore, if a woman miscarried or gave birth to a stillborn or deformed child, she was considered evil. People would say that she sinned against God, and that is why her child ended up the way it did. They would even go so far as to accuse her of being Satan's concubine. If a child was born with a deformity, it was easy for the so called normal people to claim that the deformed child was Satan's spawn, a monster born of evil, when only the name calling righteous folk were the ones being evil. When you couple this mindset with the blasphemous and pro monarchy stance the Leeds family was infamous for, it is not a giant leap to think that the largely anti monarchist religious people in the larger colonial New Jersey area would capitalize on the misfortune of Deborah Leeds. The family is already associated with monsters and devils, so why not further remove their power? Obviously, Ben Franklin did not pull punches, and he did not want the Leeds family gaining any favor in their community. It did not matter that Japheth returned to the Quaker faith. The political power had to stay with the colonies, not those whose families were still loyal to the crown. Even if Japheth denounced his connections, the damage was already done. His family had been associated with all things evil for decades. And people talk. They like to gossip and tell those gasp worthy stories. So you see, the Leeds devil lurked in the Pine Barrens long before his rebrand as the Jersey Devil. And make no mistake, it is not a coincidence that the descriptions of the Jersey Devil fall in line with the description of the wyvern depicted on the Leeds family crest, a family known to be religious and political monsters. When you look at the timeline, the story is very clear that the Jersey Devil was born in 1735. Considering Daniel Leeds had then been dead for 15 years and Titus died 3 years later in 1738, and the offspring count for both Daniel and Titus does not match the story of a 13th child, it seems to be very clear that Japheth and Deborah are the parents of the Jersey Devil. You can further theorize that any Leeds male was considered a devil. And therefore, Deborah, who was a Quaker when she married into the blasphemous Leeds family, fits the bill of being the mother Leeds whose child was fathered by Satan. Going one step further, when Japheth named 12 children in his 1736 will, he could have been ensuring that his deformed or suffering from illness 13th child, who was born the previous year, was thoroughly excluded from any part of the Leeds family inheritance. Again, this was commonplace and a surprise to no one. Another mark in favor of Japheth and Deborah being the parents of the Leeds devil is how the Leeds family ended up regaining favor in their community, with many members of that family going on to win different prominent roles in the government bodies of the Pine Barrens in the years to come. They were elected as mayors and lawmen, and you could see how Japheth converted his lineage back to the predominant faith, would have realigned them with the Quakers, and how human nature dictates that the Quakers would have used Japheth as an example to all. Someone they saved and someone whose wealth was now accessible to them. So, in my opinion, this is a clear story of how religion and politics shaped a legend, one not born of fact or fun, but bigotry. To make matters worse, residents of the Pine Barrens did not want too many outsiders coming into their forest. So it seems ghost and monster stories were propagated not only from outsiders, but from those within. There is an interesting history of how people in the Pine Barrens were looked at as less than desirable and somewhat from their own doing. But again, for the sake of time, we are not going to get into all of that. But the Pineys, as these people became known, have had a front row seat to all sorts of strange beasts that scream from the dark isolation of their forest. In 1909, there was a week-long streak of sightings where hundreds of people described seeing a dragon-like creature in and around the Pine Barrens. They said it had the head of a horse, claws, and bat-like wings. It was this string of sightings that led to the beast being renamed as the Jersey Devil. But long before this, people in and around the Pine Barrens knew there was a monster among them. In 1820, the former king of Naples in Spain, Joseph Bonaparte, the Napoleon's older brother, was hunting on his Point Breeze estate in Bordentown, New Jersey, when he saw the Leeds Devil. In 1840 and 1841, Pine Barren residents saw strange cloven tracks and heard high-pitched, blood-curdling screams echoing through the forest. These tracks and screams coincided with the strange death of their livestock. In the early 1900s, Colonel Richard Canby said the Leeds Devil was well known to the residents of Burlington County, New Jersey. He said that whenever anyone went near the monster, it would give a most unearthly yell, one that frightened all of the dogs. He is quoted as saying, "That thing is not a bird nor an animal, but it is the Leeds Devil." He goes on to say that there is no mistake about it. The creature being described is the Leeds Devil. Quote, "And it was born over 100 years ago." He's further quoted as saying, "I can remember well when it was roaming around in Evesham Woods 50 years ago, and when it was hunted by men and dogs and shot at by the best marksmen there were in all South Jersey, but could not be killed. There isn't a family in Burlington or any of the adjoining counties that does not know of the Leeds Devil, and it was the boogaboo to frighten children with when I was a boy." All good folklore has an element of fear, and we often hear the speculation of how these stories exist as a way to keep children in line. But based on this story and many others that we know the origins of, there is more to our fairy tales than meets the eye. That is why I'm not going so far as to call the cryptid version of the Jersey Devil debunked. We know how humans, especially those wanting power through political and religious avenues, are mean and twist everything up to satisfy their own agendas. What we don't know is the identity of every plant and animal on the planet. That is a fact. Even personally, I've seen some things that I cannot explain, animals that do not fit any description of any known animal, and also animals in locations where they are not supposed to be. I've recently moved to North Carolina, and I would swear on my life that I saw a badger out near my pond at 3 in the morning. I was so certain that I told my husband and did not even consider whether or not North Carolina has badgers. My husband said, no, he doesn't think this is badger territory. So I then looked it up and saw that on paper he is correct. I then spent hours going through North Carolina wildlife, trying to find out what else it could have been that I saw. And all I can say is North Carolina does indeed have badgers. More interesting, though, is the sighting I had a few years ago when I was in West Virginia. I was out at a local pond where I used to go all the time and let my dog play. And as we neared the pond, this large bird came flying parallel to us. As it passed, I was shocked to see that what it looked like was a baby dragon. It had a big head, wide wings, a round sort of body, and a long tail that ended what sure looked a lot like a club. This thing swept down, and I presume that it landed on the water. So I raced over to get a picture, but there is nothing on the water. It is completely still, not a single ripple. While there is a bit of elevation along the sides of the pond, I did always have a clear view of the entire edge of the pond. I could not see all of the water surface all at once, but it isn't a large pond. So even while we approached, I could see all of the edges and the sky. There was no place for this baby dragon to go except for on or under the water. So I waited and I watched to see if it would pop up for air, but the pond remained glass still. After what I felt like was an unreasonably long time to expect this thing to hold its breath, I texted my son because I knew he would appreciate his mother losing her mind. So I just told him that I loved him and that I also just saw a baby dragon. Next, I talked to my sister in law. She is a bird lady, so I asked her about it, hoping she could enlighten me. But she could not come up with a species in that area that met the size and physical traits of what I saw. I guess that's because what I really saw was a wyvern. So I am not saying there are no strange creatures running about. I am saying that the Jersey Devil, as it is typically promoted, has skeptical origins. In fact, rather than this 13th cursed child being born, I could more believe that Daniel Leeds brought a real life version of his family's crest to the colonies with him. That the wyvern broke loose during Japheth and Deborah's turn to keep watch over the little devil, and therefore, what we really need to be hunting in the Pine Barrens is a wyvern, possibly a baby one about the size of two turkeys stuck together, like the one I saw over a remote pond in West Virginia. Think about that if you carve up a bird for a Thanksgiving feast this year. Out there somewhere right now in a land of sand and pine, a dragon headed beast is searching for a feast of its own. Thank you for being with me today. Please like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you happen to be listening or watching on. If you like to feel as if you are being ignored, please do follow me on social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, X, and probably some others that I sign up for and then forget about and never go back to them. You can find me using some version of Lidana or Lidana Author. My website where you can purchase my delicious thriller books for your Thanksgiving break is leadonabooks.com. You can also join me on Patreon at patreon.com/Lidana. Most importantly, if you have show ideas, stories about your own weird encounters, or you just want to say hello and not be ignored for too long, please send me an email at leadonabooks@gmail.com. Until next time, no matter what your politicians or religious leaders say, keep planting your gardens according to the signs on high.
Immortal Monsters.